All right, so we are recording. So, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining in on this interview today. I'm Natalie, one of the Global Times ambassadors here at Cal State Fullerton, and I have our wonderful speaker slash guest here. Joshanna, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Joshanna Holyfield. I'm a CSUF graduate alum. I was in the Master's of Science and Higher Education program.
Awesome. Okay, so right away, I always like to start off with what inspired you to study abroad, and where did you go?
Okay, I went to South Africa, specifically to Johannesburg and to Cape Town. And I know what inspired me was that I had always wanted to study abroad when I was an undergrad, but the prices always seemed unreasonable. Every time I saw an opportunity, the prices were 6,000, 5,000. I just could not afford that. But I also knew that I was going to study abroad, or what inspired me was that specifically they were going to South Africa, and I had never been out the country, and I always knew that my first time out the country would be in Africa. I wanted to go to my homeland. I wanted to go where I knew my people were from. So it was a really exciting opportunity. The time felt right. The faculty member who led the program was Dr. Don Person. I love Dr. P, so I knew that if she was going to be there, I was going to have a good time. Everything was going to be okay. So that's what inspired me to go.
That's awesome. How long did you stay in Africa for?
I was there for about, I want to say maybe 3.5 weeks. It wasn't a very long trip.
Okay, so even so, there must have been a lot of culture shocks or like a lot of differences that you saw, between living in America and being in Africa. What were some of them?
Some of the things that stood out to me initially was I didn't feel a police presence when I was
Mm.
in Africa. So, in the States, whenever I'm driving, I'm always cognizant of like police are around, make sure that you're driving the speed limit, make sure that you don't have a broken tail light, make sure that you have no reason to be pulled over by the police. Although we know that in this day and age, if you're black, you can get pulled over for no reason. But when I was in Africa, I didn't feel that. Like, I don't remember seeing too many police officers when we were on the freeways, when we were on the streets. It didn't feel like there was a heavy police presence, and I felt very safe. Another thing I felt initially when I got there, I don't think it was a culture shock. I think I felt like I was home, like I embraced it fully. I remember it was a very long flight, and maybe 18, 16, 18-hour flight. And as soon as we landed, we got to the airport, like I was excited. I was ready to go. I'm like, what are we doing first? Let's get some food first, but like, let's go. I'm ready. So it didn't feel like a big culture shock. I felt like I was at home. A lot of things felt very familiar to me. Just being around in the different towns and cities, going out at night, seeing their nightlife. It reminded me a lot of like going to New Orleans and being on Bourbon Street at night. Their food, I thought, maybe that would be a big culture shock for me. I thought maybe the food would taste very different from what I'm used to. It didn't. It felt like the food that I eat right here at home. So I didn't feel a whole lot of culture shock. I felt very comfortable in South Africa.
So I love that you mentioned how you felt like home because even if you're there for a few weeks, some people might think, oh, this is just a vacation. But I love that you mentioned that it was home because sometimes students get afraid of being away from home, but then my hope is, students who study abroad find their second home, just even if it's just for a week or two. So I love that you mentioned that. I want to know what kind of growth did you see in yourself from the start of the program to the end of it, or are you still learning today from your experience?
Yeah, I think I'm definitely still learning, but some of I think, initial growth that I saw was, I think I was letting go a lot of my fears. So before I studied abroad, I definitely had some fears. Like I had never done it before, never been out the country, don't have a lot of family and friends that have been out the country. So it wasn't like I could call up my dad or my grandma and say, hey, what is it like when you go out the country? Because they had never done it. And I remember when I told my dad, like, I'm going through with this. I'm going out of the country. I'm going to South Africa. And he was like, okay, well, make sure you go get all your vaccinations. And I was like, what? He was like, you have to get vaccinated. Like, go to the doctor, let them know that you have to get vaccinated. Just tell them you're going to Africa and they'll give you all the shots you need. And I was like, where did you hear this at? He's like, he was like, one of my friends from work told me. I told them you were going out the country. I told them where you were going, and they said you have to get shots. So make sure you go to the doctor and get your shots. So, like I didn't have no one to really guide me through this process. We talk about like first generation college students. I felt like a first generation study abroad college student, like no one in my family had did this before. I think once I finally got to South Africa, like I felt like I was letting go some of those limitations that I had set for myself. I had never really considered like what it would be like to go abroad alone or go abroad with even like 2 or 3 friends. Like in my mind, it had to be a large group or I just couldn't do it. But once I was in South Africa for a week, I was like, I could do this again, all by myself. Like I don't need my friends to go with me abroad. I don't have to be with a group. I can go by myself. It was very easy. I thought I would get like lost in the airport. None of that happened. Like everything that I thought would happen did not happen. And I think I let go so much of my fears that after I left South Africa, I started looking for jobs abroad. So when I went to South Africa, I was, like I said, I was a graduate student at Cal State Fullerton. So I was on the job hunt. This is my last semester in graduate school. And so I'm searching for a job. And I just let go of all my limitations. Like, why am I only searching in the States? Why am I only searching in California or only searching in Nevada? Like, explore everywhere. So I actually applied for a job in Abu Dhabi. And I had never been there. So I don't know if I would have taken that job. I don't know what I would have experienced. But I think that's what South Africa did for me. Like, it really removed a lot of my fears. It helped me to explore a lot of my options and to not limit myself.
That's so awesome. So have you gone to Abu Dhabi yet or
I haven't. I still have not gone.
Okay. But I'm assuming probably after when COVID's gone and traveling is okay again, that's probably on your list.
Yes, I would love to go there. So after South Africa, the next place I went abroad was to Aruba, which was really nice. Like, loved it. That's a whole nother story. But yes, definitely Abu Dhabi is on my list, along with a whole lot of other places.
That's awesome. I'm really excited to travel again too. So you mentioned a couple of challenges or fears before you studied abroad. What kind of tips or advice would you have for students who are afraid of studying abroad or feel like they can't make it?
You should just do it. Like if you're afraid, do it. That probably means that it's good for you and that you're going to learn something, and that in those feelings that you have of being uncomfortable, you will probably grow a lot. So if you are afraid, go for it. And especially if you're doing it with Cal State Fullerton, you're not going alone. You're going to be with other students, with peers just like yourself. You're probably going to meet other students from other universities as well. So there's nothing to be afraid of. Just go. And if you go and you are still afraid and you feel like this is going horrible and I've been here for 3-4 weeks, just leave. No one's holding you hostage. Hop on a flight and go back home if it's that bad. But I think you will be fine and you will enjoy the experience. So you should definitely go. There are so many benefits to studying abroad. I think you grow a lot. You'll probably mature a little bit. You learn a new culture. You learn things about yourself. So just do it. I think it's worth the experience.
Could not have put it better. So touching on something that you mentioned earlier about your identity, how did study abroad affect your identity, and how did your identity affect study abroad? How did it all come together in the end?
So when you say how did my identity affect study abroad, can you elaborate just a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so just an example, I'm Chinese, part Chinese American. basically a melting pot of different Asian cultures. And so for me, my identity affected my study abroad experience in the way that at first I've had like a imposter syndrome when I first went to China to study abroad. And so I felt that I was not an actual Chinese person. And so for me, my identity affected my study abroad experience where I was kind of doubting myself a lot. But then by the very end of my program, I realized, oh, there's no right way or wrong way of my identity. It's my own, and I get to define it as whatever I want it to be.
Gotcha. So how did my identity affect study abroad? And then the first half of that question was what again?
How did study abroad affect your identity?
How to study. Okay. So I think for me, for one, it was really important for me to go on this trip because, like I mentioned earlier, I know that my people are from Africa. However, I know that because of colonization and because of slavery, I can't pinpoint where in Africa my people are from. So I can't tell you that my family comes from Nigeria and they're from this specific tribe or we come from this specific village. Like I have no idea. And that's the effects of white supremacy and colonization, unfortunately. So I think knowing that it had a huge impact on me emotionally, and it was something that I kept thinking about constantly throughout the trip was that I'm in my homeland, but I still don't know where is home. I still don't know what part. Like I might be in the middle of it. I might be from Cape Town, South Africa, Cape Town. I might be from Johannesburg. I might be from Ghana. Like I have no idea, but it was just a powerful experience being on the continent and knowing that this is where my people come from. This is where we have all of these rich traditions and this legacy. So that impacted me emotionally. And I think being in South Africa really reinforced what I already knew, which was that white supremacy is global. So there were like a lot of experiences that I had out there that like really made me say like, huh? Like I'm in Africa, like this is happening in Africa. So, for example, one of those experiences, I remember it was a group of us, we were jogging in a neighborhood that was close to where we were staying. And as we were jogging, we saw a white man, but they're called Afrikaans in South Africa. And he was wearing a shirt that said Compton. And so one of the folks in my running group saw it and they were like, oh my gosh, like Compton made it to South Africa. And like he told the guy, like, oh, I really like your shirt. And the guy, he was like, I don't want any problem. I don't want any problems. And like, I just remember feeling like I'm in Africa where the majority of the people are Black, like the minority in South Africa are the Afrikaans, the white people. So how are you afraid of us when you chose to live here and we're the majority? Like it just wasn't making any sense, but it just really, I guess, reinforced that, like I said, white supremacy is global, that my identity, my Blackness is always seen first. It doesn't matter what I'm doing, who I am, what kind of successes or accolades I have. My Blackness comes before anything. That's what people will always see about me first. And that was like, not a hard pill to swallow, but it was just like frustrating seeing that is happening in Africa. And then I think to answer the second half of your question, I mean, definitely, like I said earlier, I think some of those misconceptions that I may have had about studying abroad, like things that you hear from other people about like, oh, you have to go get these vaccinations or, be careful about this when you go abroad. Like some of those things that causes a lot of fear definitely impacted me. And I know that like these things are being told to me because I am Black, because there aren't a lot of us who get the opportunities to travel abroad. And so folks were, I'm sure, had my best interests at heart and wanted what was best for me, but also didn't recognize that they were instilling some more fear into me and making me have like doubts about going on this trip and participating in this experience. So does that answer your question or?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay.
I mean, I thank you so much for bringing that up and sharing that specific experience, because from what I know or from what I hear, I don't get to meet a lot of students who travel to Africa, and especially at Cal State Fullerton, we don't have many Black students studying abroad. I think 4% of our entire Black student population studies abroad, and
Mhm.
so just hearing that story for me is very eye opening because I didn't know about what people experience even though they're Black and they're in Africa. I didn't know about all that, so thank you so much for sharing. I kind of wanted to delve more into your study abroad experience and how it affects you today. So I noticed, with the pictures in your background, your shirt, and the Breonna Taylor thumbnail, I'm assuming that you are all for social justice, and that's really awesome. I wanted to ask, how did your experience studying abroad affect your feelings and actions within social justice? Because I mean, today we are facing there's a lot of problems with racism and injustices. So I want to ask, how did that all kind of affect how you feel and what you do today?
Yeah. There were a couple of thoughts that I had, and some
Huh.
things I'm still thinking about. So one of those things was the concept of Pan-Africanism. So Pan-Africanism is about uniting all Black people within the diaspora. So in the States, in the Caribbean, and in Africa on the continent, all of us uniting together so we can have economic power and ultimately liberation of our people. And so I was thinking about that and was thinking about why is that so difficult to achieve? Like we know of each other's struggles. Like Africa knows what's going on with Black people in the States. Black people in the States knows what's going on in Africa. So why is it taking it so hard for us to achieve this concept of Pan-Africanism? Or have we achieved Pan-Africanism and I just don't know about it. Maybe I'm just looking in the wrong places. So those were some of the thoughts that I was having constantly, and I still have them about the concept of Pan-Africanism. And is it still a viable concept? Does it still work for Black people in America? That was one of the things I was thinking about. Another thing, can you repeat the question one more time for me?
Yeah. So looking back on your experiences studying abroad and being in Africa, how did those experiences connect to the work that you're doing today, whether it's for students, for social justice, and things like that?
Oh, another thing that I learned in South Africa and that I still think about today, and I'll try to connect it to the work that I do with students and whatnot. But in South Africa, they had what's called apartheid. And they, after apartheid, they had what was called the Truth and Reconciliation Act. And this was, after apartheid, which was like Jim Crow in the US. After apartheid was over in South Africa, they had this Truth and Reconciliation Act. This is when the government got together. They heard from the Black South African people about the effects of apartheid on their families, on their people, and the government apologized for apartheid. And so today there's a lot of conversations in the US about reparations for Black people. And I keep hearing truth and reconciliation. And I'm like, every time I hear it, I'm like, oh no, like this is not what we want, because the people in South Africa, they got an apology from the government, but they still didn't get any land, they didn't get any resources, no money. There's still Black people that are living in shanty towns in South Africa, like living in very poor conditions, don't have legal electricity in their homes. So I keep hearing truth and reconciliation when the conversation of reparations come up in the U.S. And it scares me because I'm like, I hope folks know, like, this is not really something that's going to help us if that is the route that our government is going in, having this truth and reconciliation. An apology is nice, but land and money is nicer. So, like Black people built this country. We don't want an apology for it. I don't want a Truth and Reconciliation Act. I don't want a resolution. Like, I want what was owed to my people. So I have these conversations with a lot of my students. I work with a diverse group of students. Specifically, I advise a group called the Women of Color Coalition. And sometimes, like in individual conversations with them during one-to-ones, the topic of reparations comes up. And I'm always sharing with them what I learned in South Africa. And I'm like, did y'all hear about this truth and reconciliation thing that they're throwing out? Like, look at what happened in South Africa. We should learn from that. What happened with their government, how they apologized formally to the people of South Africa and said apartheid was wrong, but they still didn't do anything. Like, there was no reconciliation. The people in South Africa are still struggling to this day. Now, what if they try to pull this same trick here in America? Like, so I think with my students, I try to make sure that they are aware of things that are going on politically. I make sure that we have the challenging conversations, although it's very difficult at times because folks are at, varying levels of consciousness and whatnot. But I make sure we engage and we have these conversations. And I've always recommend different books. I've recently recommended How to Be Anti-Racist by Dr. Ibram Kendi. And I recommended this book maybe 2 months ago. And one of my students mentioned it last week. She was like, yeah, I just started reading this new book. It's called How to Be Anti-Racist. And like, it made me so excited because I was like, I said that. Like, I told y'all to read this book 2-3 months ago. And finally someone is reading the book. So I think after going to South Africa, it just really helped me to understand how important education is, how important it is to educate my people, how important it is for you to engage with students that are ready and willing to engage. So you have to be ready. Like, it's not something that you can just spring onto people and hope that they get it. Like, they have to be ready to have that conversation. And I think the time that we're in now, a lot of people are ready to have those difficult conversations and dialogues and ready to understand, like, how do we challenge anti-Blackness in higher education, in the workplace, etc.
Wow, that was awesome.
Yeah.
I don't know. Just listening to you speak, I'm learning so much, and I'm very excited to see what changes are coming and see how people like you are making differences in students' futures. So thank you so much for that. I was going to ask you like maybe 2 more, but I'm going to ask you one more just to wrap it all up. I feel like you gave so many good answers and so many good experiences. So my last question for you is there anything that you want to talk about that we haven't mentioned or anything that you want to share?
Well, I mean, we didn't talk about like all the fun I had. So, we did have a lot of fun in South Africa, although we learned a lot of things, especially as it relates to social justice topics. We had a lot of fun. It was a great time. I think a memory that's sticking out to me is when we went on our safari. It was my first safari, besides like at the San Diego Zoo when you go on their safari. But this was like a real safari. And it was so cool, like being up close to an elephant, like seeing lions and just different wild animals that you never get to see up close. Was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun just making memories with my peers. Like I said, I went on this trip with some of my cohort mates. So it was fun just bonding with them in another country that none of us had ever been to. And we're just figuring out how do we catch Uber, figuring out, these different systems, figuring out how do we cross the street safely. I remember like that always seemed to be a challenge because they had street lights, but I vaguely remember, but it wasn't like the street lights weren't working. It was like they just kind of went in and out really quickly. So like you'll get the walk sign and it would be up for like maybe 5 to 8 seconds, and then the cars will just start driving again. So like I just remember like these different things that were happening. But I think the bonds that I created and all the memories that I made were worth the trip. Like if I could do it all over again, with the same people, I would, because it was just so much fun. From the moment I got on the plane to the moment I got off the plane to the moment I got to my room, and like it was just fun. I loved it. Another thing that we haven't talked about, oh, we got to go see the prison where Nelson Mandela was at. I can't think of the name of it, but it's like on an island. But it was just like another impactful experience, like seeing the jail cell where Nelson Mandela was held for years. That was a touching experience. Just everything. Like it was a great trip. I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. And like I said earlier, I felt like I was at home. Like when we went to Cape Town, I felt like I was at the Santa Monica Pier and just hanging out by the water, eating good food with friends, talking, laughing. And I wasn't in Santa Monica, like I was in South Africa. So there was just so many similarities, even just being in the community. I felt like I was right at home, like just seeing the different people walking around outside look like my neighborhood. Like there were times where I definitely had to remind myself, you are in another country, you're not at home, but it felt like I was right at home. That's it.
That perfect way to end this interview. You shared a lot of different insights and experiences, and I'm sure that once students see this, they're going to think, okay, no, I can do this, and this is possible for me. So thank you so much for spending time to share those experiences.
Definitely, no problem. Thank you for having me.